Hi, I'm Jess, and I'm going to be talking about the bugs that I feed to my reptiles and how I kind of care for them and how I store them. Before I get into all that, I'm going to talk about where I source my bugs from. I've purchased feeders from online sources, from chain pet stores, from local pet stores, and from expos. For me personally, at this point, I usually am only purchasing my feeders in bulk from expos because money-wise, that is kind of the cheapest option that I have personally found. So at this point, all the bugs that I'm feeding to my reptiles and all the mice, I'm getting from expos in bulk. So that's where I get mine from. Through the research that I've done on feeders, that's just the cheapest and most cost-efficient method that I have found. But since I am buying in bulk, I do have to put a little bit more thought and care into how I'm storing and maintaining these bugs. Currently, I only keep two kinds of bugs to use as feeders. I keep dubia roaches and mealworms, but I keep whatever I have in this 3-tier drawer system. It's just plastic, so it's super easy to clean out. It wasn't expensive to buy at all, and it's just kind of an easy storage thing that I kind of use. And then as you look closer, I obviously don't have any bugs in here. This is just extra cardboard that I kind of switch out. And so I have a separate drawer for my roaches and a separate drawer for my mealworms, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So the roaches and the worms are both set up in a similar way, but I'll show them both anyways. As far as their food source in here, this is a mix of just dry oatmeal and a mix of cricket food powder. So that's what they're kind of eating on. For their water content, they usually get pieces of fruit, or as you can see, some pieces of vegetables, like whatever I kind of have. And they also get cricket quencher, and that's like, this is all pretty much moisture. So that's how they're getting their water content and their food content. And then I usually have pieces of cardboard in here because as you can see, that's where they will typically all be hanging out. So that's the roaches. And then right below them, like I said, it's kind of the same thing. So these are the mealworms, the same kind of food. They're just eating oatmeal and like cricket powder. They also have pieces of cardboard that they use to hide. They also get pieces of fruit. They're also eating cricket quencher. But as you know, mealworms obviously turn into beetles. So not that it really specifically matters once they turn into beetles. I could just leave them in here. But I do tend to kind of separate them out and put them in their own container just in case maybe they do decide to breed or anything like that. It's easier for them to find each other in there than in this whole big space. So this is how I keep the 2 feeder bugs that I have. And next I'll be kind of talking about how I prep them to feed to the animals. So when it comes to feeding the bugs to the reptiles, I kind of go through each drawer and pick out a handful of both and kind of pick and choose how I feed them from there. So I'll pick them all out and I put them in these big plastic cups I have from like fast food places, things like that, that can kind of get nasty, I guess. And I always put calcium powder in here so that once the bugs are in there, I can easily spin them around really quick and dust them. So I do, of course, feed a calcium powder to all of my reptiles. So I take the bugs out using just feeder tongs and I just drop them into the cup with the calcium powder. And once they're in here, like I said, I just kind of spin it around really gently and they're dusted. I did feed everyone the other day, so that's why there's only a few in here to use as kind of an example. But usually no matter how much I'm feeding, I'll put them all in here, dust them all, and kind of feed them out of this cup by tong feeding everyone individually. So then I just go through and pull the bugs out with the tongs and kind of go through and feed everyone who needs to eat that day. When it comes to feeding my bigger guys, I don't technically have to hand feed them or tong feed them. I just kind of will throw the bugs in. That way they can kind of try to track them down on their own, kind of get that as a form of enrichment when it comes to feeding time. But since they have fruit right now, obviously I can just easily put the bugs on top of their fruit. And as you can see, when he's going for the bugs, he'll actually pick up and eat some of his fruit as well. So it kind of works in a two-way street. So another thing I like to do with my reptiles is I actually created a feeding chart. This is really easy to do. I just went on Microsoft Word and created a table, and I obviously put in the days of the week, put in the names of my reptiles, and then as I use that week, I date it for whatever day it is. So what I do is when I do this, I go through and mark how many bugs I fed them, what kind of bugs I fed them. I'll put whenever I refilled their water dishes. I'll put if I had to mist down their enclosures, just things like that to kind of help me keep track of when I'm doing what. This obviously isn't something that you have to do, but I feel like it is kind of beneficial, especially when you're trying to keep them to a schedule and you want to make sure that you're being consistent with when and what you're feeding them. So that's just a really simplistic overview of how I deal with my feeders and how I deal with feeding my reptiles. Obviously a lot more goes into it and it does go way more into depth, but that's just the kind of basic skim of the surface and how I kind of do things. That being said, the way I do things might not work for you. It works for me, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be that way for everyone. So when it comes to feeders, there's definitely lots of research to do out there. I know lots of people have questions about bugs and how to feed them to their animals, different things like that. So it's definitely something that you can look further into if you're having issues with it. But that being said, this is how I do things. This is how it works for me, and I just wanted to share that with you guys.